the last time we were together, we began looking at the setup for the final vision in the book of Daniel. Now, this vision or this conversation that Daniel had with this angel was so amazing and it was so scary that God went out of his way to set the stage so that Daniel would have the confidence in what he was going to hear. And I am absolutely amazed at the lengths that God would go through to give us the confidence that what he says is true. That he doesn't ask us to go out with just blind faith, but he gives us everything that we need so that when we're acting, we're taking a reasoned step of faith. And so today, um, I'd like to begin to look at the most important vision and message in the book of Daniel. Now, I believe that God wants us to know what's going to happen right before the great and terrible day of the Lord. That day when God is all that he is to the world that has rejected him. He's justice. He's punishing wrath to his enemies. And he is grace and mercy to his people. And so what Daniel does is that, or I should say what God does through Daniel, is he gives a panorama of the world leaders. And he talks about what's going to happen in the future, and he sets it up in two parts. The first is what's going to happen in the near future, and then in verse 35, he's going to jump ahead to what's going to happen in the far off future. So he's going to set an incredible picture for us. And I have to tell you that I've wondered for years why Daniel 11 is actually in Daniel. I mean, is it even needed? Because the events of Daniel chapter 11 are also found in Daniel chapter 8. And in fact, he talks about the same three kingdoms coming to power in the future. And actually, in many ways, he does it in chapter 2, and he does it other places as well. So the natural question is, why would he say it again and in the detail in which he does? Now, there's much more detail in chapter 11 than there is in chapter 8. And so I have to ask myself the question, why? And I've asked that question many times. Well, I think I've finally discovered the reason. You see, the vision of Daniel 8, I believe, was given to Daniel to show him that God was in control of the future as well as being the God of the present. And I think this was important for Daniel. This was important for him to have that confidence so that he could stand up against this society or this kingdom of the world that wants to assimilate and draw him in. And so I think it was important for him to know that his God, the God that he's serving, is so much more powerful. And I think it was there to give him comfort. And I think Daniel 11 was written not for Daniel, but for those who would be alive at the end of the age. Because remember, Daniel was concerned. This whole thing sets up is that Daniel is concerned for his people. And so God sends the angel to let him know that I'm going to tell you what's going to happen at the end of days, when God is going to finally finish fulfilling the promises that he made with Abraham. So I think that Daniel 11 is going to go into so much detail so that those who are alive at that time would be able to look back at the words and understand that the God who orchestrated the events of the Persian Empire, the Grecian Empire, and even the Syrian-Egyptian wars 2 centuries before Christ will be able to orchestrate the events at the end of the age as well. So I think that in this passage we have, first of all, again, this is for us. Daniel didn't see any of that. Everything for Daniel is in the future. But for us, we see part in the past, part in the future. And I think that he does that so that those who are living in that time period would have that confidence. So next on digging deeper, I want to take a look at the prophecy of Daniel chapter 11. Daniel 11 begins with this understanding of kingdoms that are going to come about, that are going to come in place, so the one after the other. And so the first kingdom, of course, would be the kingdom of Persia. And that's what he begins to look at in verse 2. And he says that Daniel says that there will be three kings in succession, and then there will be one king that will change the trajectory of the world's system. And so we read in Daniel 11, it says, three more kings shall arise in Persia. And then a fourth shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. So what do we find in history? What actually happened? Well, there were three kings who came. There was Cambyses, who reigned from 529 BC to 522 BC. You have Pseudo-Smyrtus, who reigned from 522 to 521 BC. And then you have Darius I, who reigned from 521 to 486. So you had three kings in succession, which is what God, or the angel told Daniel was going to happen. And then finally you have Xerxes I, who reigned from 486 to 465. Now, Xerxes was this fourth king. He was fixated with Greece. And what he did without knowing this, he actually put Persia on a trajectory that would lead to its demise, because he was the first Persian king to attempt to conquer Greece. And so for the next 100 years plus, we see the Greeks and the Persians going back and forth, always brought about by the Persians trying to go up and conquer Greece. And we're going to find that that's going to have some horrible, horrible ramifications in the future. And so the next thing that he does is that Daniel's going to jump ahead 100 years or so. And in verse 3, and he says, a mighty king shall arise, and his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the four winds of heaven, but not to his posterity, nor according to the authority with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. And so this fourth king is actually Alexander. So this is the fallout of what began with Xerxes. And so between 334 and 330 BC, Alexander conquered Asia Minor, Syria, Egypt, and the land of the Medo-Persian Empire. Now, his conquest extended as far as India before Alexander's death at the age of 32 in 323 BC from malaria with complications from alcoholism. And so a few years after his death, Alexander's kingdom was divided among his four generals. Seleucus over Syria and Mesopotamia, Ptolemy over Egypt and ultimately Judea, and Lysimachus over Thrace and portions of Asia Minor, and then Cassander over Macedonia and Greece. Now, the reason for this distribution was because Alexander had no heirs, which is exactly what Daniel prophesies for us in Daniel chapter 11. Now, you would think that these generals would get along, but alas, friction arose from the two most powerful of the four generals. And so Daniel lays it out for us, beginning in verse 5. The conflict that Daniel talks about in this passage is not just one set of battles, but it's actually a series of conflicts that went on for over 100 years. And so what I want to do is I want to read the passage, and I want to look at what happened in history. And so there is no easy way to do this. And so if in the past I've gone one, but it gets to be unruly after a while. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the passage, and then I'm going to go back and take a look at what happens in history. So the first thing that we see is that we see, beginning in verse 5, it says, the king of the south shall be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger than he, and he shall rule, and his authority shall be a great authority. But the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. And she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure. But she shall be given up to her and her attendants, he who fathered her, and he who supported her in those times. Then from a branch From her roots one shall rise in his place, and he shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north. And he shall deal with him, and he shall prevail. And he shall also carry off to Egypt their gods. For some years he shall refrain from attacking the king of the north. And then the latter king shall come into the realm of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. And his sons shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, which shall keep coming and overflow and pass through, and again shall carry the war as far as his fortress. And then the king of the south, moved with rage, shall come out and fight with the king of the north, and he shall raise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his hand. And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, and he shall cast down tens of thousands, but he shall not prevail. For the king of the north shall again raise a multitude greater than the first. Now many shall rise against the king of the south, and the violent among your own people shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision that but they shall fail. And the king of the north shall come and throw up his siege works and take a well-fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not stand, or even his best troops. And he shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his hand. And he shall bring terms of an agreement and perform them, and he shall give him the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom, but it shall not stand or be to his advantage. And he shall turn his face to the coastlands, and shall capture many of them, but a commander shall put an end to his insolence. And he shall turn his face back toward the fortresses of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall, and shall not be found. And then shall arise in his place one who shall send an exactor of tribute for the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he shall be broken, neither in anger nor in battle. So, what Daniel has just done here, he has just recorded for us several hundred years of human history. And it is absolutely incredible because he's writing as though this is what's going to happen. And Daniel had no idea how God was going to pull this off, but he did believe that God was going to do that. So let's take a look at what actually happened in history. And again, I wish I had this side by side. Maybe I'll see if I can post it. But first of all, we see Ptolemy the First, Soter, who reigned from 323 to 295 BC. He was the strong king of the south. So this is where this whole thing begins. So while he is in power, we have Seleucus the First, Nicator, who reigned from 312 to 281 BC, and he was the stronger prince who took over Babylon and the other areas. So now what we have is these two strong kingdoms, one in Mesopotamia, one down in Egypt. Now, the other two generals, they're hanging out in Europe. They're along the Mediterranean. They're building condos and so on, and they're just having a good time, and they're out of the story. But we have this, it all comes down to these two empires and these two families. So, as we continue on, Ptolemy II, Philadelphus, who reigned from 295 to 246 BC, sent his daughter Bernice to marry Antiochus II, Theos, who reigned from 261 to 246 BC, to form an allegiance, just as Daniel said that this would happen. And then after that, we see Antiochus's first wife, Laodicea, conspired to have Antiochus and Bernice killed. And Ptolemy II died at about the same time. So again, we have this, somebody else is going to come up against them. Well, Bernice's brother, Ptolemy III, rose up in 246, and he reigned until 221 BC, and he defeated Seleucus II, Callinicus, who reigned from 246 to 226 BC. And then he returned back to Egypt with his spoil, which is, again, exactly what Daniel said. And then from 241 to 223 BC, the two nations were at peace, just as predicted. So far, Daniel's doing pretty well when he's laying out what's going to happen. But it gets better. After a while, Seleucus II hoped to retake part of his kingdom from Ptolemy III, but he was not successful. And so Antiochus III rose up, and he reigned from 223 to 187 BC, and he recaptured territory in Phoenicia from Ptolemy the Fourth Philopator, who reigned from 221 to 204 BC. Now, Ptolemy the Fourth defeated Antiochus's forces at the Battle of Raphia in 217 BC, and according to Polybius, Antiochus lost nearly 10,000 footmen and had another 4,000 captured. So again, Daniel's doing really well here. He's even coming up with numbers. Now, Antiochus launched a second invasion of the coastal region of Syria following the death of Ptolemy IV. And some pro-Seleucid Jews joined the forces with Antiochus to fight against Egypt. So Antiochus's forces defeated the forces of Ptolemy V at the Battle of Panis near Mount Harmon, and he captured the city of Sidon. Following the Battle of Panis in 198 BC, Antiochus controlled the Promised Land. Again, just as Daniel said. Antiochus sent his daughter Cleopatra I to marry Ptolemy V in 197 BC as part of a peace treaty with Egypt. And then Antiochus attacked Asia Minor and Greece, but Rome intervened. That stronger prince, Rome intervened and defeated him at Thermopylae and later at Magnesia, forcing Antiochus to abandon these conquests. And then 1 year after the treaty with Rome, Antiochus was killed while seeking to rob the temple of Bel and Elam. And then Seleucus IV Philopator, who reigned from 197 to 175 BC, succeeded Antiochus. And he sent Heliodorus, his finance minister, to Jerusalem to seize the temple treasury. Later, Heliodorus apparently assassinated Seleucus. So what we're seeing here is that Daniel is, when he lays out for us, if you put that side by side with what actually happened in history, we find out Daniel's pretty good. In fact, he's better at telling history before it happens, and many people are looking at history after it happened. But let's continue with verse 21. In his place shall arise a contemptible person to whom royal majesty has not been given, and he shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. And then armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. And from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people. And he shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. And he shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time. And he shall stir up his power and his heart against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall wage war with an exceedingly great army. But he shall not stand, for plots shall be devised against him. Even those who eat his food shall break him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall away, and many shall fall down slain. And as for the two kings, their hearts shall be bent on doing evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table, but to no avail. For the end is yet to be at the time appointed. And he shall return to his land with a great wealth, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant, and he shall work his will and return to his own land. At the time appointed he shall return and come into the south, but it shall not be this time as it was before. For ships of Kittim shall come against him, and he shall be afraid and withdraw, and shall turn back and be enraged and take action against the holy covenant, and he shall turn back and pay attention to those who forsake the holy covenant. And then forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and the fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering, and they shall set up the abomination that makes it desolate. And he shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. And the wise among the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by the sword and flame, by captivity and plunder. And when they stumble, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery. And some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made white, until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. So, he spends a lot of time. He starts out here by talking about this list of what's taking place throughout history to bring us to this final king. This final king that he spends a lot of time talking about. So who is this guy? Well, following the death of Seleucus IV, his brother seized the throne with the help of the king of Pergamum. And the new king adopted the name Antiochus IV Epiphanes, and he reigned from 175 to 164 BC. Now, Antiochus, or the word Epiphanes, means glorious. So we can assume that Antiochus loved him some Antiochus. And he defeated the forces of Heliodorus and the army of Ptolemy VI Philometor of Egypt, who reigned from 181 to 146 BC. And he also deposed the Jewish high priest Onias and sold the office to Onias's brother Jason. So now we've got some intrigue going on in Judea. Now Antiochus took advantage of a power struggle in Egypt and sided with Ptolemy VI Philometor in a way that helped him consolidate his own power. So we've got deceit going on. But unlike his predecessors, Antiochus used his wealth to buy favor and secure the loyalty of individuals and groups. So Antiochus's ultimate goal was to conquer Egypt. And the Egyptians tried several times to defeat him in battle, but they were unsuccessful. And each nation tried to deceive the other. And so they're going back and forth, playing games with each other. But after his victory in Egypt, Antiochus stopped in Jerusalem to loot the temple. And then Antiochus led a second attack on Egypt, but was forced by the Romans to withdraw. And on his return home, he vented his anger against Jerusalem and the Jewish people who joined forces with the Hellenized Jews and seeking to eliminate all Jewish religious customs. So Antiochus then profaned the temple and the altar, turning the temple into a worship center for Zeus. And Antiochus's violent persecution brought about a Jewish uprising led by the Maccabees. And thousands were killed during this time, but the temple was eventually recaptured and purified. And these events became the precursor to the activities of the final ruler, the Antichrist, which begins in verse 36. So, now, thank you for making it to the end. If you're still with me, I'm glad you are. But the point here is the accuracy of the prophecy. You see, Daniel did not need to go into, he didn't need this kind of accuracy at all. Because, Daniel's worm food by the time any of this stuff comes about. Daniel's long gone. So he didn't need any of that, but we do. And this, in fact, this is so scary accurate that critics used to say that Daniel 11 could not possibly have been written before 167 BC because he nails it time after time after time. He is absolutely incredible with the accuracy of his predictions. Now, the Maccabean revolt ushered in the Hasmonean Empire, and so the rulers of the Hasmoneans were not from the tribe of Judah. They were, in fact, priests from Levi. So in other words here, we have a kingdom with kings who are priests. So that's the end result of what happened with Antiochus. And so what Daniel's going to do next is he's going to switch over to one more king. And we're going to see this in verses 36 to 45. Because all of the events that I've described so far in chapter 11, they're all in the past. Every last one of them have happened. But from verse 36 onward, we jump to the end of time. Now, this could very well be the 70th week of Daniel chapter 9. And Daniel has much to say about this king. And we'll talk about why I know this in the future here in just a second. So, first of all, we have this king described by Daniel in verses 36 to 39, where it says, "And the king shall do as he wills, he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what is decreed shall be done. And he shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers, or to the one beloved by women. And he shall not pay attention to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above all. And he shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these, a God whom his fathers did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. and he shall deal with the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. Those who acknowledge him shall not those who acknowledge him he shall load with honor, and he shall make them rulers over many, and shall divide the land for a price. So Daniel says two things about this guy. The first thing that's important for us in verse 36, it says that he will set himself up above all other gods. And then the second thing he says is that he will institute a final world religion. Now, it's important to note that this prophecy has not been fulfilled historically. Neither Antiochus Epiphanes nor even Herod the Great ever sought to exalt himself and magnify himself above every god. And neither of them set up a world religion either. So the individual in this view is still the future. He's still in the future. And I would argue it's the Antichrist first described for us in Daniel chapter 7. Now again, here's the thing. If Daniel can be so accurate, bringing us from the time of the Persians in the 500s BC all the way up to 164, 167 BC, if he can be so accurate that everything that he says is going to happen actually did happen, then I think it's reasonable for us to say that when he talks about something in the future, that he is as accurate in talking about the future as he was about talking what would be in our past, because all of it's in the future for Daniel. But as we continue on in verses 40 to 45, we see the beginning of the troubles for this king. It says, at the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, but the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind with chariots and horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall come into the countries, and shall overflow and pass through. And he shall come into the glorious land, and tens of thousands shall fall, but these shall be delivered out of his hand. Edom and Moab, and the main part of the Ammonites, he shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. And he shall become ruler of the treasures of gold and silver and all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and the Cushites shall follow in his train. But news from the east and the north shall alarm him. And he shall go out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. And he shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountains, and yet he shall come to his end with none to help him. So what Daniel tells us here is that things go well for this king at first. Egypt and the Middle Eastern countries go up against him, and he fights back, and he wins temporary victories. And then he begins to have problems in the east and the north. And now he will win again, and then he will go up against Jerusalem, where God will finish him once and for all. And the result of this conflict will also usher in a kingdom ruled by a priest, the Messiah, the Lord Jesus. That's the point of the book of Hebrews. And so I want to look at this last battle. We'll take a look at that the next time that we are together. But I want to end it with this. And again, if you made it this far, I thank you. But I want you to get this. If you don't get anything else out of this, I want you to learn this. This will be on the test. I am convinced that God went into so much detail because he wanted to show his faithfulness. That if God could be so accurate in verses 2 to 35, then his people who are alive at the end, during what I believe is the tribulation period, and that they can have the confidence to know that the rest of the vision is true as well. And in fact, if we put the rest of this vision, the last part of this, of what this king, you juxtapose that or put it up against what Revelation says is going to take place with the Antichrist, you see a lot of similarities. You see, it is reasonable to say that they're talking about the same person. And so I think that God wants his people to know, because remember that it's never been God's intention, it's never been God's will that anybody should perish. In fact, the Bible tells us that God longs for everyone to come to a saving relationship and knowledge of him. We come to that through the Messiah. The Jewish people, for the most part, have missed it. Paul talks about that in Romans chapter 11, chapters 10 and 11. And he tells us that they have been blinded. But there will come a point in time when the restrainer is gone, which I believe is the church, and God's going to pick up his plan, and as John writes for us that from Revelation chapter 4 all the way through 19, I would actually argue into 20, going into 20, that he's working through his people, Israel, and I think that they're going to be seeing Daniel here as a roadmap to say, okay, hey, this is what this guy's like. We need to make sure that we're on the right side, because we know that if you take the mark of the beast, you're going to be in trouble. You're never coming, because you will have made a decision to be following after the kingdom of the world. And so Daniel wanted to give them a warning, which is in reaction and response to Daniel's prayer in Daniel chapter 10. So what does that mean for us? What that means for us is this, folks, is the fact that God is that good at telling what the future is. So what that means is that we can rest assured that the promises that he makes for us, if you are a Christian today, the promises that he makes for us are valid, which means that we have hope, which means that we can continue to serve Jesus, do what he wants us to do, no matter what happens around us, that we have the confidence to know that God will complete that which he began. And so I pray that you were encouraged by these words. And again, I know it's technical. There's a lot of things back and forth here. You may have to watch it a couple of times. But if you want to get an actual timeline of this, just put a note in the comments. You can find me at fccefree.com. Just fill out the form out there. I'll be more than happy to send it to you, and which kind of puts them side by side. And again, I pray as you gather with your siblings in Christ this week and worship the Lord, I pray you have a fantastic time. And I look forward to seeing you again in a future video. God bless you all.